And he said to me, Zev, love your talk, love this work, except for one thing. And I said, what's that? He said, we are making so much money, hand over fist, that you can't expect us to stop what we're doing and change. And so the point of the story, I said to him, is this: it's never a good time to transform. It's never a good time to change. And that's the difference between real leadership and lack of leadership.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. Very happy and excited to be sitting today with the fantastic Dr. Zeev Neuwirth. Dr. Neuwirth recently put out a book, and I read the book almost cover to cover. I think I have one chapter left, but I listened to the book, which is not only written by Dr. Neuwirth, but also read on Audible by Dr. Neuwirth, which is always nice when the actual author reads it because, not to digress too much, but a little sneak peek onto the book, Dr. Neuwirth actually deviates multiple times from the script and kind of gives some additional perspective from just himself. And so that's always a treat, I think, when you actually have the author reading out the book instead of hiring a voice actor. But I digress. Super excited. Dr. Neuwirth has a huge podcast in healthcare as well, super meaningful. And yeah, thank you so much for sitting with us today.
Mental, my great pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed your podcast, and I love your energy. I love your approach. I love the direct honesty and the purpose and mission of what you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we're trying. So let's take a short trip down memory lane, and then we'll kind of really dig into it. So tell us just quickly where you grew up and why medicine.
I grew up in North Jersey, and Mendel, I think you and I think others could appreciate this. One of the core things my parents taught me, and they were immigrants to this country and love this country so much. Particularly my father is instilled in me just a sense of patriotism that it's really just inside of me. He was so grateful for being able to come here and the opportunity that it afforded and the freedom and liberties. But one of the things they taught me was this tradition of tikkun olam, which comes from actually a Jewish tradition, but I think it transcends. It's in all major religions. I think is this sense of we have a responsibility here not just to get by, but to also there's an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity. There are so many aspects of our reality and our world that need repair. And so rather see that as a problem, I see it as an opportunity that we have a chance to participate in repairing the world. And that, I don't know how to say it any other way. I hope it doesn't come across as corny or anything, but I think underneath, the day-to-day transactions and the day-to-day getting my job done and all that, my purpose was that, and that drew me to medicine. And, it actually, to be honest with you, it's in the last 10 years of my career, 8 to 10 years, there's been an inflection, and I've come back to that sort of core sense of, how do I connect with people who really have goodness and, kind of a sense of humanity and want to generate something for the next generation. And again, yes, the day-to-day is the day-to-day, and we can't avoid it. And we live in a material world and all of that sort of stuff. But at the same time, we can infuse that with a sense of humanity. And that's what I've been doing.
That's amazing. So for you, it's a calling. It's a mission.
I think it's an existential issue. I think, in healthcare, it is, we're at a point, and again, I think it's important to be real about things and not to be critical and point fingers. By the way, I really, as you will get into the book a little bit, I hope, but my approach is not to criticize or critique. And I've been criticized for that. They're like, well, you're not digging deep enough and you're not pointing out the problems. And I'm like, I think I am, but I think the answer is not in the problems. The answer is in the solutions, and looking for people are creating things that work. And so, my approach has been positive deviance. It's been about appreciative inquiry. I think things get solved in that way much faster and much better. And so that's just kind of been my approach.
Now, was there any? You mentioned your father was an immigrant, right?
Yes.
So was he in medicine? Was there you can help people in many different ways? Was there any kind of formative experience that really pushed you in that direction versus I don't
Um,
know policy
yeah,
and
yeah. So both my parents are immigrants, and they both came in their 20s to this country. They brought me as an infant here. I was 2 months old when we
wow.
came here, and but I grew up here, so I'm American first, and by far, and New Jersey first by far. And, um, uh, my dad, um, my dad had this thing. Neither one of them are in healthcare, but he was an amazing listener. My dad would talk to everybody. It didn't matter whom. He was an engineer. He worked with some senior government officials, with five-star generals, and he said to me, Zev, he taught us, all of us. Uh, he said, it doesn't matter who the person is. I don't care if they're the guy who's attending the gas station, or someone taking out the garbage, or a five-star general. They're all human beings, and they all are children of God. And I listen to them all in the same way. And you know what? He did. It was amazing to me. It didn't matter who he met. He would talk to them and listen to them, and joke around with them. And he didn't have to teach me that. I just saw that my entire childhood. And it taught me the power of compassion and empathy, and just, seeing that we're all just people. And that was, so I don't know if that drove me into healthcare, or I think it might have, but it also taught me how to be in healthcare. It taught me about the core of the profession of healthcare. And it's a lesson that you go so deep, I can't even, I'm not doing it justice. But yeah, that's really the thread. I'll tell you, in my entire career from the beginning, I've been, again, in awe of what healthcare does, and also deeply frustrated by it. And I've seen how we don't treat people as people. We treat them as patients, which I think we need to get beyond this whole patient thing and be patient experience and patient centered care. People aren't patients, people are people. And I would say let's supplant that with the human experience and with life centered care. And that's really, quite honestly, what the book is about, and what I'm about over the past decade or so. Yeah.
That's incredible. So we'll jump into the book in just a minute. It's called Beyond the Walls. Fantastic, really fantastic read. Um, one question for you: you're not only trying to make a difference, but you're actually making a difference. You're impacting healthcare, and that's fantastic. But when you look at healthcare, it is a gigantic, multi-trillion-dollar problem. Um, what makes you think, or what made you think, when now you're actually, now it's a little easier because you've got some data behind you that you're actually making a difference, but when you started out, what made you think that you could actually make a difference?
When you're talking about when I started out in the recent endeavor I've been in of the last decade,
Yeah, when
or
you moved from just practicing
yeah,
medicine to
yeah,
starting a movement.
yeah. So I'll try to answer it this way. I think we all struggle. I mean, clearly burnout, moral injury is what we're calling it now, and experts have written about this notion of moral injury. And moral injury comes from, actually, from the military, from soldiers who have seen just terrible things and been engaged in terrible, excuse me, in terrible things, and they come back and they have this moral injury, this burnout, this PTSD that is really existential in nature. And now that they're talking about moral injury, the experts are talking about, and the psychiatrists are talking about moral injury as in what doctors and nurses and other in healthcare. And we know burnout is rampant. It's literally one out of every two providers, one out of every two. This is not like a minor problem. This is not an abnormality. This is the norm. Is that when you have 50%, this is beyond the tipping point, 50%, and you see it everywhere. I see it everywhere. And people are jaded and just, disenfranchised and depersonalized and dehumanized. And I was in that too. And I think I've gone in and out of that my entire career. Over the past 10 years, I decided to I had to dig myself out of that hole. And so this is not some sort of academic thing. This is not some sort of professional thing. This is me trying to survive as a human being in healthcare. And about a decade ago, I started 8 or 9 years ago, I started to seek out people who were doing things differently, who were divergent, who were positive deviants in a way. And I started to ask them, what is it you're doing? How are you doing it? What is your sentiment? It wasn't just about transforming healthcare or improving healthcare. They were doing something fundamentally different and positive and hopeful. And I was at a lecture recently by an expert in burnout and wellness from Duke, one of the leading organizations who's been doing this work in relieving burnout and wellness. And he talked about something which many of you know about, which is called learned helplessness. And this was Dr. Marty Seligman from University of Pennsylvania coined that term over 2 decades ago, one of the leading researchers in psychology. And he calls it learned helplessness. And there are numerous studies and numerous books written about it. And I realized, and I got up on the stage and I said, because I went right after this guy, this expert, and I said, you know what? What I've been involved in over the past decade is learned hopefulness. Learned hopefulness. And I have literally learned how to be hopeful because I have been documenting example after example after example, dozens of them, of people who are making a difference in this world. And for my part, I want to focus, not to ignore, not to deflect, not to hide any of the realities of healthcare, because believe me, I could go there in a second with anyone. I could talk about the statistics, and I'm happy to go into that part. But for me, the answer is in looking at the solutions. There's this phrase that the future is already here. It's just not everywhere. And so I'm finding that hopeful, positive solutions, people who are doing this work and actually fixing all the different parts of healthcare. And what I'd like to do, and that's what this book was about, it's a collection of bold, courageous, visionary, hopeful examples of real people, real organizations actually really transforming healthcare. And that's what's given me the realistic, practical sense that, yes, despite where we are and despite where a lot of people say we're going, which is not a good place, if you look at the numbers, I believe, and I'm cautiously optimistic about this, but I am optimistic that we can do it. But Mendel, it has to start with a conversation like this one that we're having. That's why this is so important. It has to start with us talking and saying, you know what, we can actually do this. Here's people who are doing this. How do we replicate that? How do we adapt that? How do we, and this is what's really important, how do we put our energy and our attention and our resources? I recently took a driving course with my teenage son, and it's and one of the lessons the instructor taught us was that where you look is where you go. So if you're looking up in front at the road, you will go in the right direction. If your eyes start to deviate to the side of the road, they said don't look there, because where you look is where you're going to go. And actually, many years ago, when I was a younger person, I took skiing lessons. And I remember I learned to ski when I was in my 20s or 30s. And one of the key things I will never ever forget is the instructor said, where you look is where you go. That's where your feet go, that's where your body goes, that's where your energy goes. And don't look at trees, don't look at poles, because that's where you're going to go. Look at the space. Look at the
Yep.
positive space between the trees. That's how people who do tree skiing in the woods, they are not
Mm-hmm.
looking at the trees. They are looking at the opportunity between the trees. And that's my lesson. That's the core part of what I've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I took a couple flying lessons, and same thing. When you're
Is that right?
landing, you got to be dead center on that end of the runway. The end
Oh,
of the runway,
interesting.
that's where Um, but and your voice is not just needed, but it's so fresh and important, and it really comes through the book. And you're absolutely right. There's leaders in healthcare. I'm not going to name any names. We're not going to be that podcast, at least not yet. But there's a couple very large CEOs I see on LinkedIn every single day, and I literally had to stop following a couple of these people because everything was so pessimistic. Every
Mm-hmm.
single post was how everything
Mm-hmm.
is horrible and all the optimists are uninformed and all the new models are garbage and everything is horrible. It's just one
Mm-hmm.
big burning pile of garbage. and there's nothing to do. And you know, your book, you know, Beyond the Walls, really really does a good job with doing what you said. You know, you're not ignoring the problems, you really do, you spell them out. You also have a very good way of kind of taking out a lot of the noise and getting to some of the couple root issues, but then describing, like you said, sometimes the future is actually present, and you know, you're kind of taking a magnifying glass and highlighting where those spots of future lay, and then trying to expand them out. And so the approach that you're taking is so necessary. Let's jump into the book a little bit. It's not your
And
first book.
and Mendel, before we go into the book and the
Sure.
domains I outline, which I'd love to share with you and the audience. I know you've read the book, so you're familiar with it. I do want to say one last thing about this issue of the heaviness and the hopefulness, and this, by the way, this is constant work. I will, I don't want anyone to think, oh, I'm hopeful and all the time. It is a constant. It's just like going to the gym and like, you see, look, I'm in my gym clothes, and I apologize for anyone who's offended by that, but it is just like, physical fitness. You don't just become physically fit and you're physically fit for like that. You actually have to work on it daily. And I've made a commitment to myself that I'm going to do that. So I wake up early in the morning, very early in the morning, and I go and I do physical fitness and exercise. And in the same way, hopefulness is a exactly like that. It's every day I struggle and work to be hopeful and to continue to focus on that. And one of the things I recently came across again was this quote, and I hope this is helpful to folks. I know it's helpful to me to remember this. There's a quote by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist around the time of World War II. He had written a book about a new form of psychotherapy, and he was extremely well known. He was literally like working with the greats of psychiatry in that era, in the 40s and 50s. And he wrote this book, and he was then taken to the concentration camp, and the book was taken away from him, and he had to survive horrors that hopefully none of us will ever even be able to imagine. And for years he was in different concentration camps, including Auschwitz, which was this terrible death camp. And he survived. He lost his wife, he lost his parents, but he survived. And what he discovered was that survival was based on people having a sense of meaning and purpose and holding. It wasn't the people who were physically strong, wasn't the people who were the smartest. It was the people who had a sense of meaning and purpose and hopefulness, and they had to create it. And he has this brilliant quote that says, between there is a space between the stimulus and the response. As human beings, there is this space between the stimulus where we find ourselves and what we can do about it. And in that space, there is the freedom and the power to choose our response. And in choosing our response, we have growth and advancement and joy. And I think that for all of us, and this is one of the questions I get asked a lot. It's like, Zev, I love, this is a true story, by the way. I gave a talk in the past year, and at the end, a doctor raised his hand and he said, I love what you're saying, but listen, we are hospital systems. We're so in debt right now. We're, financially, we're distressed, and we're just trying to survive and create a margin, and we can't do this sort of transformational work that you're talking about now. And I turned to him and I said, you know what? It's a good argument, except for one thing. And he said, what? And I said, well, in 2020, 3 or so years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, I was giving a talk similar to this talk, and a doctor just like you, a smart, well-intentioned leader, raised their hand, and he said to me, Zev, love your talk, love this work, except for one thing. And I said, what's that? He said, we are making so much money, hand over fist, that you can't expect us to stop what we're doing and change. And so the point of the story, I said to him, is this: it's never a good time to transform. It's never a good time to change. And that's the difference between real leadership and lack of leadership, because real leaders know that there's a space between the stimulus, our current reality, and where we need to go. And they do not limit themselves. They do not make what they do dependent on where they are, because if that was the case, humanity would have never moved from the caves. And so I hope that's helpful to folks. I hold on to that phrase and Viktor Frankl's comment that there is a space, and as leaders, and it takes courage and it takes commitment, and it just takes doing it every single day, doing something, anything to move the ball forward into a better future. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. And just a quick follow up question on that point, and then we'll jump into the book. In physical fitness, it does get easier to lift those weights,
You're right.
right? Every
You're
time.
right.
Are you finding that hopefulness is a muscle in that sense? Are you finding it easier to find the hope rather than push away the despair?
Yes. My God, Mendel, that is so brilliant. Thank you for pointing that out. I hadn't even really ever thought of that. Um, yes, you're absolutely right. It becomes the word I would add to what you said is it becomes a habit. And so, when you get, and this is so true, when you start to do something that's hard and then you do it and you do it, and then it becomes a habit. And actually, not only does it become, in some sense, easier, and I don't even know if easier is exactly the right word, it just becomes something you do. And you keep on doing, and then you keep on doing it more and more and more, and better and better and better. And even though the work itself is harder as it goes on, it actually seems easier because it's become a habit. And then what's really profound is if you're not doing it, you actually feel like something's missing in your life. And so for me, this habit of hopefulness, this habit of opportunity, this habit of looking for people who are actually making these changes, it still takes courage, it still takes commitment, it still takes energy. But for me, I think your point's so well taken. I've got to think about what you just said because it's so deep and it's so true. It's, yes, in the beginning it's so hard, and it's, and how am I going to do this? Now I don't see how I cannot do it. I'm so compelled every day to talk to people like you who are positive, who are hopeful, who are, I mean, I think you do this in your work as well. It's just, it's pointing it out. And I think that's hard. I think that's important for us to understand what it is we're actually doing, because I find that most people who are doing amazing things in the world don't even realize they're doing amazing things. And for me to talk to them and to sit with them and to be in awe of them and to appreciate that and to share it, you know, if we, and that's what this, I think it's almost, someone has said to me, a bunch of people actually have up to me over the last few weeks, and they've said, Zev, this isn't a book. And I said, well, what is it? They said, this is a movement. This is a hopeful, positive movement in healthcare. And we need to figure out how to actually bring more people into it. And I know we've been talking at a high level, and I think what's important is, in fact, I was just talking to someone at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement just before this call. And I said to them before the end of the call, I said, listen, yes, we've come up with a lot of plans and excitement and energy. I'm going to leave and I'm going to do one actual concrete thing that's going to move us forward. And that's the important point, is what I've learned from talking to these hundreds and hundreds of leaders and entrepreneurs who are really creating a new healthcare, better healthcare, more humanistic healthcare, is it's about the doing, to actually do one thing and to start. As you said, you could talk about exercise. I could talk about exercise from now until, infinity. Get me in the gym and have me lift one weight. Now we're talking, right? It's in the doing, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. It's absolutely in the action. And yeah, you mentioned a really good point. You probably quote maybe 40 or 50 different leaders throughout the book, people that you've had conversations with and really, serious interaction with their actual work. And it's probably a good point. They probably don't even realize what they're doing. And you framing it in the book really accentuates and highlights the work that they're doing. So, the book is split into three sections, if I recall correctly.
That's right.
Um, and why don't you talk through what those three sections are, and why those? I'm sure that you could have had a million sections. Why those seem to be the most important
Yeah.
to be on the walls?
And I'll do it briefly and let you move us forward. So I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of these leaders, these really courageous people, and I mean that truly courageous, who are successfully transforming healthcare. And by the way, beyond doesn't mean outside the walls of the healthcare system, because many of the leaders I've interviewed are directly in legacy systems. I think there are amazing, courageous leaders within the system. Some are again outside the system, but it's not really an inside outside thing. Beyond actually doesn't mean outside. Beyond means transcending the walls.
That's such a
And
good point.
is that right?
That was a great
Yeah.
word. Great
Yeah,
word
it's
choice. Yeah.
right. It's transcending. And I've got to be more mindful of because I've heard now people saying outside, and it's like I didn't do a great job. In fact, maybe it's not that I didn't do a great job. I don't think I even understood it when I was writing it, that I specifically chose the word beyond. I didn't say outside the walls. I said beyond the
Yeah.
walls.
Yeah.
And so I took these hundreds and hundreds of interviews and examples, and believe me, it's not just I just recorded. I've transcribed these interviews, each one of them, and I've
Wow.
studied the transcriptions. And so
Wow.
it's a little crazy. I spend over the past 8 or 9 years, I've spent, I would say, 15 hours on each one of these interviews, at least some 20 hours, really studying them. And they distilled down into three critical strategies. This is what's going to transform healthcare, in my opinion, based on my work over the past many years. The first is the digital revolution. I actually don't believe many people have a real understanding of the digital revolution that is happening in healthcare, and we could talk about that. And it's not just about the technology; it's what the technology enables, and that's number one. I'll skip to the number third one, which is about the market disruptions. And I don't believe that most people, I would say even leaders in healthcare, really understand the movements that are happening in the market. And I talk about platforms and what a platform is as a new business model and how that's revolutionizing healthcare. I talk about literally, I have a graphic about the new partnerships that have been going on in healthcare, that they're unprecedented. I mean, the way organizations are coming together and collaborating and consortiums and partnerships and vertical integrations, it is just amazing. So that's the third section. That's the third domain, the third critical strategy. The first one being the digital revolution, the third being the market revolution. The middle one is the most important. And I wish I could have spent more time in the book. And in fact, if there's a book number three, which I'm beginning to think about, it's going to be expanding the middle one. Because if we do these outer two and don't talk about this middle one, we are heading for a dystopian future. And the middle domain is about the humanistic revolution in healthcare. And
Yep.
what I'll say about this, again, to be very, very real about it and very honest and not critical, I'm just stating reality. And it's based on research, and it is reality. And our healthcare system is in the dark ages. The delivery of healthcare is in medieval times right now. Racism, sexism, ableism, ageism, classism, industrialism. These are the isms that dominate the reality of our healthcare system. These are systemic, these are structural, they're insidious, and they're implicit, and they're just there. Let's just call the reality. Again, this is not me making it up. This is out of decade of research, and also all the literature will support this. Given that, given where we are, the ism that we need to be focusing on, this is the responsibility of every leader in healthcare, whether you're a provider in a hospital system, in a healthcare system, a payer, medical device, pharma, whatever, the government. The ism that needs to transcend all those other isms is humanism. And in that middle section, I give story after story, and I'm going to give many more. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of examples of individuals, groups, communities, organizations that are supplanting all those other isms with a humanism in healthcare delivery. And again, if we have that as the middle, strategy, supplanted and reinforced by and enabled by the digital revolution and the market revolution, that is actually what is happening today, and that's what we need to realize and double down on. And that essentially is the book. I explain those three strategies, those domains, and I explain it through stories, through the real stories of real people who are really doing this work in organizations.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie two those things together, there's this interesting narrative that I see put out there relatively often. like you mentioned, these massive players that are getting more and more heavily into healthcare. Amazon with One Medical, and you talk about that in the book, and Walmart with Walmart Health, who we've had on the podcast, and obviously CVS between Signify and Oak Street Health, and then you've got ChenMed, who we've had on the podcast as well. We've had Oak Street Health on the podcast. Like a lot of these guys, and the consolidation is crazy. And watching, 2023 was just a mad year from that perspective. And you see a lot of people that are hating on these collaborations because they're just saying, oh, these big organizations are just getting into it for the profit. They're just going to make things worse. This is like a big brother play to come in and monopolize healthcare, and they're just and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I as having spoken to a lot of the leaders, I find the exact opposite. I find, to your point, it's the actual humanism and the interest in making healthcare more human that is actually compelling these companies to enter the space. And they may be and you give a couple examples where this has gone wrong, and companies have tanked and other companies are doing well, and so obviously there's no telling which direction it'll actually go in. But from my experience talking to a lot of these leaders, they're like, okay, we're really successful at a platform like you talk about in the book. We think we can really affect something super positive in healthcare. And they start looking at it through that humanistic lens. We give such a good user experience to buy, paper plates or books or whatever you need, or groceries. Why can't we just cross that over to healthcare? And so I'm personally excited about a lot of those. Obviously, again, there's no telling where that actually goes, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether you think that's it's a capitalistic, money grab for these large companies, or if you think they're actually getting into it for the humanistic aspect.
Yeah, it's a both and. So clearly there is a business opportunity, right? And you know, that's, I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to argue with that. I mean, we live in a capitalist society, and unless you want to argue about capitalism, that's the reality. And so, yes, there's a market opportunity, there's a business opportunity. And actually, let's talk about the market opportunity, because, the market opportunity, people, organizations, businesses invest in areas where there's opportunity. They're not going to put their money, their time, their energy where there's no opportunity. So the question becomes, well, what is the opportunity they see? And the opportunity they see is that healthcare is inaccessible, it is unaffordable, it is inconvenient, it is impersonal, right? It isn't that safe. And again, happy to talk about the statistics. I'll back up all of this with statistics and numbers and research. And so this is the opportunity. And what's remarkable is they're actually saying and thinking, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be better than you are. And which is, quite honestly, and again, this is what, the gestalt is, and that's not so hard because you're so not there in terms of access, convenience, personalization, customization, affordability. And so, when, we could pick any one of these, but, Walmart, I mean, think about Walmart. And think about, actually, I like Walmart because their mission, think about their mission, back to Sam Walton. I mean, this guy won a presidential award, right? I think it was from President Bush, if I recall correctly. And his whole mission was, he was like, I want to make products and service affordable to the average American and American family. I want to deliver high quality goods, and I want to deliver them with respect and dignity. So, and that was his mission. And you know what? Whether you're a fan of Walmart or not, how do you, I mean, you got to laud that. You got to just respect that mission. And Sam Walton, his family, and that company have done that. And again, they've brought, I mean, if you look at the stores now, and of course they're ubiquitous. There's one that's a stone's throw from where I live, and I walk in there sometimes just to look at what's going on. But they're getting better and better. They're developing like food, and even fresh food, and healthcare products, and medications, and they're doing it in an affordable way. And so, we could argue and hypothesize about whether this is good or bad. I look at what they're actually doing and what they're delivering. When Amazon could deliver, healthcare in a similar way that it delivers other products, and when it transparently tells me, the good, the bad, the ugly, let's make some comparisons. That's a good thing. Again, we're talking about access, convenience, affordability, and I would say even the issue of equity, making it healthcare, available to more people. And again, so that's how I'm seeing this movement and how they're doing it too. There's a lesson in there. And again, no one's perfect. I call it in the book the titans of disruption. These are these huge retailers, the huge pharmacy chains, as you pointed out, like Walgreens and CVS, and and also the payers, right? Optum, Humana, and again, far from perfect, and there's a lot that they need to improve upon if to become more trustworthy. We could get into that if you want to talk about PBMs and other things like that. So there's real reality there, real things that are not, they're kind of ugly and embarrassing, and we have to really change that. But at the same time, there's a lesson in there, and I think the people are trying to do really good work. I've interviewed leaders in all these organizations, and how they're going about it too. There's some lessons for legacy healthcare. One of them is vertical integration. You cannot build healthcare all by yourself. Hospital systems, academic medical centers, for the last few decades have tried to do it all by themselves. If it's not built here, it's not going to happen. That has to be erased. We have to understand that you have to start to stack. You have to bring in partnerships and other organizations to create the ecosystem. And I would tell you the so-called payers, the insurance companies, the retailers, the pharmacy chains, they have all understood that it's much, much faster, much more effective to bring in people who are experts to do it and to build an ecosystem rather than try to build it yourself. So anyway, I hope that was a helpful response to your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think we could probably sit here for 3 hours and chat. Unfortunately, we are coming up on time. First off, the book is Beyond the Walls. This conversation was by no means covered actually what's in the book. This was a conversation kind of in the margins of the book. And so I highly, highly recommend going and checking it out. It is on Audible. It's on Amazon. You can find Zev on LinkedIn. But I genuinely think that Zev does a fantastic job in framing the book in a way that's super clear, and also fun. And so it doesn't get too technical, but it's technical enough. And there's so many anecdotes and real life examples of the things that he's talking about. It brings it really, really current all the way up to almost its launch, and so that's pretty impressive as well as far as the data. So highly recommend go check it out on Audible. Don't forget to give it a review. And final question for you, Zev. What is one tip that you can give to a healthcare leader today to get into the gym, do that first 5 pound rep as far as finding hope in their day to day in the outlook on healthcare?
Well, without being too self-serving here, I do think, Mendel, you read the book, and I actually think you could probably explain it better than I do. You're a bit more eloquent in some of it, and insightful. I would say, read the book or listen to the book, because I guarantee you, if you're in healthcare, no matter what stakeholder you're in, you will find an example. And as Mendel was saying, it's a fairly easy read. I wrote it for that reason, in that way. You will find an example of something you can do. And I would just say, start with anything. And many of you are already there. But the other tip too is, it's all about resources. It's where are you actually spending your time and your money? And I think that's really where we have to go, and that's what I'm trying to help move along. If catalyze that understanding that the stuff we're talking about here is not ancillary, it's not an aside, it's the core. You know, do we want to leave a better healthcare system to our the next generation of leaders and the next generation of providers and the next generation of the American public? Is that what we want to do? Then the question is, how do we start doing that? And again, I think it's really about the doing rather than about the talking about the doing.
One action at a time. And this conversation was one of those. So, Dr. Neuwirth, once again, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you, Mendel. Can't thank you enough.